Welcome to the Akashic Recordings. I'm Annette Dalloo, Akashic conduit, channel, and spiritual guidance coach.
And I'm Julia Nalivaiko, storyteller and creative producer of conscious media content, such as this podcast. And we're very excited to bring you this podcast.
Super excited, in fact, because this is something that has been in the works for quite some time. And I don't want any of you to worry out there. You can still listen to all of the episodes of The Heart of You. I think there are somewhere in the vicinity of 80 some episodes that are still on this channel. So don't be concerned about losing any of that content. If you are still interested in referring back to it, or if there's episodes you missed, they are all still here in your playlist.
Indeed. This is the evolution of the previous iteration of the podcast.
It is a journey into past lives. The whole reason for this particular series of the podcast is to essentially demystify what it's like to get an Akashic session. And there's going to be a little bit of something for everyone in each episode.
Absolutely. So as the title might suggest, the Akashic Recordings are a recording of an actual Akashic Records session with you, Annette, and one of your clients.
Yes, it is essentially the sessions that I do almost every day.
Each episode is recorded with the permission of your wonderful clients, whom we'd like to thank and acknowledge for allowing us to record as they open up to you during the sessions. So everything that happens, everything you hear is real. It's an actual unfolding session. The only thing we change is the name of the person, and that's to protect their privacy. But everything else, their reactions, their experiences, their emotions during the session, all of that is real.
Correct. The only other thing that we are obviously doing is we are cutting down the amount of content, because each session that I do typically is anywhere from an hour and a half to 2 hours. And essentially we have edited out the bits that may not necessarily be resonant for somebody, or that might not be widely relevant.
And following the session, you and I will do a deep dive into the topics that came up in the session.
And we're going to go a little bit deeper later on in this episode about what the structure of an actual session looks like.
Exactly. But before we do that, why don't we take one step back and just talk about what the Akashic Records are?
Sure. The simplest answer is that they are the book of life, universal knowledge, the recording of literally everything that exists in the universe. So you're talking about every life, every soul, every interaction, every place, every building. Everything has a record. If you just want to look at it as representative of a book, hence why we chose that for the cover of this podcast, and that book is endless. And basically, you can access this book anytime. Everybody has a record, and we can access all of the experiences of your soul.
And where is this book? Is it in a different dimension?
It is. I mean, it exists everywhere. It's part of divine source energy, ultimately.
And what does one need to do to access it?
A lot of shadow work.
That sounds like hard work.
It is. And I say that semi in jest, but it is true, because it took me quite a long time to be able to read the records, even though I knew it was something I was going to be doing, because I had to get rid of all the fears. I had to do the shadow work that I needed to do to raise my frequency so I could actually be in a place of being able to access them. So if you want to consider we're living in 3D, third dimension, the Akashic Records would be considered like ninth dimension. Because of that, we have to sort of stretch our energy up to those frequencies. So am I always living in that ninth dimension? Absolutely not. Like, I wouldn't be able to function as a human being. So what I need to do is I need to stretch my energy up. And in order to do that, you cannot be in lower energies.
So it's something that most of us have the capability to do theoretically, but in practice, it takes a lot of concerted effort to be able to do it.
I mean, yes, in theory, there are people who are born being able to remember their past lives. Matthias DeStefano, he's one of them that was just born knowing his past lives. And there are a lot of children nowadays who are just waking up knowing everything that's in their Akashic Records. As we ascend as a society, that's actually going to become more and more frequent. as you do the shadow work in a previous life and then you incarnate into a new one, you're going to have immediate access to these types of abilities. So there will come a point in time where everyone will be able to remember their past lives.
For those of us who are not there yet, this is why we're creating this podcast.
Correct.
And so with that in mind, when people come to you for sessions, what are the reasons that they come to you with?
I would say the most common subject matters would be soul purpose and life purpose. A lot of times people are a little bit lost, like they don't know where they want to go, what they want to do in terms of the rest of their life. Another reason would be relationships, like why certain people are in their lives. Do they need to stay in their lives? Is there something they need to learn from this person or from this experience? A lot of times it's repeating patterns in their life if they have just a lot of things that they continue to do over and over and over again without realizing it, and they don't know why the universe keeps on giving them this experience. Belief systems are also another reason, because a lot of times people are living their lives the way that society has kind of told them to. And so getting a session like this can help them break out of the conformity of societal conditioning to live more authentically.
These are the types of things that people would often go to various types of therapists. What would you say is the difference that an Akashic Records session provides from other types of therapies or modalities or things like that?
Well, I don't want to say that the Akashic Records are like the be-all, end-all, because other therapies are certainly effective and helpful. But ultimately, I do believe that almost every modality is actually, in fact, tapping into that universal consciousness, that universal knowledge for something. When I'm in the records, I'm tapping into that Reiki energy. I'm tapping into healing energy. I'm tapping into mediumship gifts. I'm tapping into ancestral knowledge. I'm tapping into what people would consider like shamanistic practices, things like that. So I'm tapping into a lot of the various different things in order to get to where we need to go with the client. Now, where this is helpful is that this is giving the person an ability to feel for themselves and to confirm with themselves the information that they already know that's encoded in their soul signature already. So ultimately, I'm kind of not telling them anything they don't already know. Their soul already knows this. It's just I'm putting it into words or visuals that they're going to be able to really accept and understand. So, of course, other modalities are beautiful and work just fine as well. It's just, this is just another one.
Sounds like it's quite holistic.
Well, that's how I've shaped my sessions, yes. And that was guided through my guides. So other Akashic Records sessions might look different than mine, but that's just because mine have evolved with the way that I've been guided by Akula, my Akashic guide.
Very good. Okay, we're going to get into that a little bit later.
Yep.
Let's just start with why you and I have decided to create this podcast.
Yeah. From my perspective, it seemed like the most obvious thing in the world, yet I did not come up with the idea. You did.
I will happily take the credit.
Yes. I never once thought about doing that until you brought it up. And yeah, it seemed like the most logical evolution of the podcast.
You and I would just be chatting about what you do, and we'd be talking about it in quite general terms. And it's worth noting that you usually don't remember a whole lot of what happens in your sessions.
Or anything.
Yes, memory is perhaps not your strongest point, but I think it's by design that you don't remember a lot of the sessions, because you do many a session every single day, and if you were to keep all this information, it would not be beneficial to you whatsoever.
Correct.
But, you know, me, I was just curious to know more about the sessions and what actually happens in them and how they unfold. And between the lack of memory and also obviously the privacy that you have around your clients, there was only so much that I was able to understand. And so, you know, it was potentially just my sneaky little way of becoming a fly on the wall in the sessions. But in the process, I think the fact that we're able to open it to a much wider audience is a super cool thing.
Yeah, because there is always a message in it for everyone in some way. So even though it's not your session, you're going to be able to take away some nugget of information that's going to be helpful for you. Basically, we want to demystify what it is like to look into past lives, Many people come to me and say that they're afraid of what they might find out. Maybe they were somebody awful in a previous incarnation. Ultimately, it doesn't matter who you were. There is no judgment. What matters is how much of these lives you are currently carrying around. And even if you've never been interested in having a session and don't plan on doing so, which I do encourage you to consider because I think everyone can benefit from this. There's still something in it for everyone. And that's kind of what we're saying, is that the universe speaks to us through others' experience. And we can recognize our own struggles and challenges in other people's experiences and sessions.
That's so true. I can vouch for that myself, because as we're producing the session, as we're editing the sessions, I always feel like there is something for me personally that really touches me in my own personal life situation. And so we can only hope that that will extend out to other people.
And it's important to get the messages they need. And, there are plenty of ways you can get these messages, but this is just one other way that we can contribute and deliver these messages.
You and I have been wanting to set an intention for this podcast, and we decided to use your powers to tap into universal wisdom to do so for us, because why not?
Exactly. I will be channeling this information through my guides. Channeling is when I allow my guides, so higher level beings, whether it's Akula, my Akashic guide, or an archangel, or any of the ascended masters, to essentially speak through me. It is basically the practice of putting your human self aside, if you will, and allowing that universal consciousness to flow through you. And it gives you more information than you have in your brain at that current moment.
Now, I have heard you channel before, but for those people that haven't, what's the difference in the way that you speak when channeling and when speaking?
One of the things that happens is the cadence of my voice changes. Sometimes the tone of my voice will change as well. It just depends on who I'm channeling. I can actually feel the energetic difference of who I'm channeling. So if I'm channeling somebody like Archangel Michael, it's a very stern energy and I can really feel it. And I can also feel it if it's a very soft energy. If it's another guide who has a very soft, loving energy, I can feel that too. So that may come out in my voice. If you see me physically, as you've experienced, Julia, that my demeanor changes. The way that I sort of carry myself changes, I guess, if you will.
It does. It's pretty cool. You go into kind of robot mode.
It is.
And now we're all going to have a taste of it with the channeled intention for this podcast.
This is myself, Annette and Julia, as well as Akula, my Akashic guide, as well as Lucius, the interdimensional being who just put his paw on my knee. All of us are here to ultimately help expand your consciousness, your knowledge base, and getting to know yourself on a core level. We don't often spend time getting to know ourselves on a core level. We think that getting to know what kind of movies we like and what kind of music we like is what makes up who we are. And although those are things that we do in our 3D lives, it does not make up who we are. Who we are is ever expanding. Who we are is special on so many levels. And you might ask, how can we all be special? Well, guess what? We are. Every single one of us is an expansive being. And wouldn't it be great for you to step into that expansion and be able to have the knowledge to work to your strengths, to work towards what you are meant to do here in this lifetime on this planet? That is the goal of this podcast. That is the intention that we are all setting. Take from it what you will. Come back to it. Listening to the episodes in a year from the time that they air, you will get different messages from them than when you listen to them initially. There is no linear time, and you all know this. All the messages will come to you in exactly the right time.
That's beautiful. Thank you.
Yeah, cool. Thank you, Akula. And me, and Julia, and Interdimensional Cat. For those of you who know Lucius, you know that he's not just a cat. He is also a multi-dimensional being. And you will hear him meow throughout the course of this podcast, I can guarantee you. He is one of my guides. And that is often the case with a lot of pets, actually. So a lot of pets can be your spirit guides as well. They do that to be closer to you. They can help transmute and clear energy for you. They do all kinds of things. But my Lucius, he's a special one He definitely wants himself to be known.
And he certainly shall be known throughout the course of these discussions.
Absolutely. And I felt like I needed to mention him because as I started the channel, he literally reached up and put his paw on my knee, which he doesn't often do.
I think that was just his way of saying, I'm with you in this endeavor.
Yes.
Yeah. Thanks, Lucius. So now that we know what is the energy behind this podcast, why don't you talk us through what a session actually entails?
Every session starts with 3 deep breaths, and we go through a brief meditation. Once we go through the brief meditation, we go through the grounding practice. The grounding practice is super important, not only for me, but also for the client, because essentially the client is in the records with me. And so that energy can be super, super amazing. It's very yummy, yummy energy, but it could also make you feel very lightheaded and kind of discombobulated because it's such a high energy. So the grounding is incredibly important because of that. And then we basically pull up that grounding energy, and I do a chakra scan from the root chakra all the way to the heart chakra. And when I do these scans, it's not necessarily how the chakras are now in your current incarnation, although it could be if that's important. But a lot of the times what I will see is a sort of an echo or an impression of what was happening in previous lifetimes that we're going to cover in the session. So then from there, we invite in that soul star chakra light, which is usually about 6 feet or 2 meters above your head. And I allow that light to go in through the crown chakra of the client as well as myself, and then let that divine light land into the heart space, connecting the earth energy as well. And once I've asked the client for their name and birth date, then we dive in and open the records. I will usually ask the client to give me all of the questions up front. The guides always have a plan and a beautiful way in which they weave the story. So I don't presume to answer the questions in order that I am given the questions. I always ask the guides where to go first. So then the main part of the session happens, and that might include looking at past lives. It might look at current lifetime. It might look at inner child wounds. It could look at repeating patterns, relationships, all kinds of things. I do timeline work. I do a bit of channeling. I do a bit of energy clearing. It just depends on what is called for in that particular session. And it doesn't always happen this way, but the structure of how I like to do it is towards the end of the session is when we will go into the sacred space, do any clearing for vows, soul contracts, ancestral line traumas or curses. Sometimes that comes up, sometimes it doesn't. Just depends on the client and what we're covering. Some things might take precedence or be more important than that. And then I close the records. So that is the basic structure of how a session goes.
And it's clear from listening to a few of the different sessions that the way that it unfolds is really different every time, but every time it serves the client. It unfolds in a way that makes perfect sense.
Exactly.
So let's talk about the experience of being in the records for you. What does it actually feel like?
It feels beautiful. I mean, it's a really wonderful energy. I feel very peaceful. It's very uplifting energy for me, which is interesting because when I first read about the records, it sounded like it was going to be super scary, and it's just not. It's hard to get used to initially. So when I first started reading the records, I could only stay in the records for 10 minutes at a time, if that. And then I would get a super big headache, and then I would have to close them. But that sort of comes with time and practice and more shadow work. So I love being in the records.
So how does the experience of the Akashic Records show up for you? Do you see it? Do you feel it? Do you hear it?
So it's all of the above. When I first started reading the records, they showed it to me like a movie behind my eyes, which was super interesting because even with all of my intuitive gifts, that had never really happened before. So initially it was the sort of clairvoyance that came up. Then it was the clairaudience. So then I'll hear words, phrases or words that'll just sort of come into my hearing. And then there's the knowing. There's like all of the clairs that kind of come in. I do sort of get the full experience, if you will.
Kind of sounds like it's you decoding all of this information and trying to interpret and translate it and for it to make sense to the person that you're delivering it to.
Correct. Sometimes I see a whole bunch of things and I'm like, I don't get what that is. I don't understand what that is. And my clients who are listening, who work with me regularly, have heard me say this, which is, I don't know what that is. Can you show it to me in a different way? And so they will. They'll show it to me in a different way. Or at that point, they might just say, okay, let us take over the channel. We'll channel the information for you and give you the information that way. And I'm happy to do so. I have a lot of aha moments within a session where I will see something or describe something, and then there will come something later in the session where it'll put all the pieces together. I love those moments. I love those moments because it's so wondrous to me how they're able to weave that in. And there's no possible way that I would be able to do something like that. Like, I just don't have the universal knowledge in my own brain to do that.
What you're talking about, that will certainly play out in some of the sessions that we'll be featuring.
Yeah, exactly.
Your guides are like master storytellers. You know how you're watching a movie and you get a shot of something, but you don't really know what it means, but then it becomes meaningful later. It's exactly that.
Yep.
Yeah.
So speaking of guides, just to give you a little glimpse as to who I work with when I'm in the records. So Akula, I mentioned, he's my Akashic guide, and we all have an Akashic guide. And if you want to, you can download the meditation that I have on my website to meet your Akashic guide. Not everybody's going to be able to meet their Akashic guide, but it is a meditation you can use for your spirit guides as well. It is a good way to meet some of your spirit team. So I highly recommend it. So I have Akula, my Akashic guide. I have my spirit team who also come into play on occasion. Then I will also work with a lot of archangels. And I do want to talk about the archangels for a second, because a lot of people have this idea that archangels are religious or associated with a particular dogma, if you will. And they're not. They're just other higher level beings. So you have seraphims, you have archangels, you have just regular angels, you have guardian angels, you have intergalactic beings, you have like the Council of Light. There's tons and tons and tons of different types of high frequency beings. It just so happens that I work with a lot of archangels just because that's who I started working with first. So I've developed a stronger relationship bond with them. Could I start working with other ascended masters and other beings? Certainly. And actually, in fact, certain ascended masters and certain guides will come in based on the client as well. So it just really depends on what we're doing, what type of energy work we're doing, and who the client is.
Okay, so it's just basically a whole team that are helping you out in these sessions.
And not just me. Everybody has access to all of these guides. So, I mean, when you talk about, let's say, Archangel Michael, he's probably one of the most well-known. His energy is so big that his energy can literally be everywhere all at once.
And what about Lucius's energy? Because it feels like it's everywhere all at once whenever we're recording.
It's true.
Archangel Lucius.
I love you. But you are making our life very difficult right now.
Okay, so we've got a pretty good understanding of what the experience is like for you when you do the sessions. What is the experience like for your clients in the sessions?
Most of the time, I would say the most common comment that I get is, oh my gosh, I feel so much lighter. Usually people will say, I feel expansive. I often get also, I feel exhausted, or I feel tired, or I feel drained in some way. And that is something that is common to have happen when you're going through a lot of shadow work. If you're going through a lot of, tough, heavy clearing, you might be feeling it 3 or 4 days after, or even a couple weeks after. So it depends on the type of session it ends up being. If it's super heavy in clearing, that can be heavy for the client as well.
From the client's point of view, because I've received a session from you before, so I have that personal experience of what it feels like, some of the things that you've mentioned. So I can definitely confirm the different feelings that come up throughout the session. The feeling of energy moving through your body that's a very intense and real feeling that you get, and that's how you really know that there is something going on an energetic level that you don't maybe fully understand, but you do not doubt it because the feeling is just that strong.
Yeah.
You get a lot of chills, and that is like a really strong confirmation that what you're hearing is really resonating. And also something that I've noticed that you do, oftentimes a subject matter comes up that was not brought up in the first place, was not part of a question. It's just a path that you intuitively follow in the session. It ends up unraveling this really big thing that they hadn't really considered to be important. And that ends up usually bringing up a lot of emotions and being a really important moment.
Yeah, because oftentimes what we think is important and what is on the forefront of our consciousness may not be the important bit. The important bit may be what is buried deep within your subconscious. And that's what they usually pull out in that moment. I've had people come to me with 20 questions, and the guides will either answer them or they'll ignore all of them and go in the direction that they want to go into. So, it really just, it depends on the energy. It depends on what is important for that person to know at that time.
Yeah. And it's important to go with it and to trust the guides because they do know better.
They do. And they also know when you're ready for something, because oftentimes I will have a client say, well, I don't want to know about X, Y, and Z. Can you please make sure I don't hear that? And I will always say to them, you will only ever hear what you're ready to hear.
Has there ever been a time when something that you've said has just not resonated with a client? They've just completely not connected with the information you've given them?
Yeah, absolutely. And there can be many reasons for that. First of all, I'm human. So human error. I am not always 100% right or accurate. And any psychic that says that they are, be wary because there's always room for error in some way, shape, or form. Even, we were talking about earlier today, I was watching a documentary on Edgar Cayce. He's one of the most prolific Akashic record readers, and he very much was vocal about the fact that he wasn't right 100% of the time or even close to it. There were times when he was flat out wrong about a lot of things. That being said, there are also times when it's about timing. Because I may say something right now that might not resonate with the client, but then a year from now, I'm going to get an email and say, oh my God, now I understand that whole session, right? Or that whole bit of the session or whatever it happens to be. I've never actually had it where somebody has said to me, that whole session didn't resonate with me. It's usually only one small part or one bit. Ultimately, it is about the timing of whether that particular thing lands for you or whether or not it's just something that just might not match up right now, because we don't have all the information. That's the whole thing. Like, I'm filtering this information into my consciousness through universal knowledge, and there can be misinterpretations. There can be glitches in the matrix. Who knows? It can be just all kinds of weird things that could happen. The planets are weird. The sun has solar flares. There can just be off days. And
Mercury goes into a retrograde.
Correct. Correct.
Yeah, so it's important to accept that despite our divine nature, we are human beings as well, and we make mistakes, and sometimes we don't understand things, and keep that in mind. Yeah.
Well, and especially when you're listening to this podcast, I want people to keep in mind that this is my small corner of the universe. This is my interpretation of what I'm seeing. If it's not true for you, let it go. It's fine. You don't have to believe what I believe. You don't have to accept what I'm saying, but just take what resonates.
Absolutely. That's all we can offer people.
Yeah.
So you've been doing this for a little while now. How long?
Oh, don't ask me about time.
I know time doesn't exist, but come on, let's try to speak in human terms.
Yeah, but my memory sucks. Okay. So what are we? We're 2024. So I have now been doing this for 4 years.
4 years. So how did you become an Akashic Records reader?
Well, so I was just coming out of the big portion of my spiritual awakening, the big dark night of the soul, in this period of time where I had this voracious need for information. And so I was reading every book, watching every YouTube video, like doing everything I could possibly do to get my hands on information on, spiritual awakening, everything from every subject matter. And I came across a couple of different people. Brian Weiss was one of them. Ernesto Ortiz was another one. And I ended up getting Ernesto Ortiz's book called The Akashic Records. And I read his book and read it cover to cover and promptly closed it and said, wow, that's really scary. I don't ever want to do that, and just put it on the shelf. And then I read Many Lives, Many Masters by Brian Weiss. That resonated with me. I was very, very thrilled to read that book. It's a very good book if you haven't read it. It's a real account of hypnosis sessions where people dive into their past lives. So after I read all the information, I was like, yeah, okay, cool. That's about it for that. And I didn't really think about it again. I did know that my guides had kind of told me that this would be something I'd be doing, but I couldn't see how. I mean, I knew I was going to go into some sort of spiritual realm for my work, but nothing really seemed to fit. But then ensued another dark night of the soul, another dark night of the soul, and all the shadow work. And eventually I got to a place where it started becoming very clear that this is what I was going to be doing. And so I started taking more seminars. I went to see Brian Weiss. He had a one-day seminar I went to with a friend of mine. And then that was the very first time I was able to actually open the records. And it was very, very brief. They showed me the most mundane lifetime they could have possibly shown me. And I think they did that because they wanted to make sure that I understood that I was, in fact, in the records. Because never in a million years would I have come up with something so boring in my whole life. So it was very mundane. It was very boring. So then I moved to Paris and I ended up taking an Akashic record training. It was a week long. And I'm not joking you, by the end of the week, I was reading the records full on. So clearly I had been ready maybe for a little while. I just didn't realize it. And so I then did my first sessions and was really surprised at the reaction. People were like, oh my gosh, I was blown away. Wow, that was so accurate. Yes, that's exactly what I'm going through. All of these things. So during those practice sessions is when I really cultivated what it is that I was doing. Believe it or not, in the first couple of sessions, I actually went into the records before calling the client or before getting into the session and channeled the information and wrote it all down, which took forever. And I only did that for a couple of sessions before I trashed that idea and said, you know what? No, I just need to speak. That saved a whole lot of time. But I think I was just really insecure initially. I was afraid that I would get into the records and nothing would happen. And I do want to tell you that did happen once. And it's such a good story. It was in the beginning of when I was first starting out and I was doing these sessions. And it was with a client who, we were going to open the records. And I asked her for her first name, last name, and birthday. She gave it to me, but at the time I was asking her to type it in the chat in Zoom. And she did. And so I went to open the records and nothing happened. And I was like, whoa, wait, what's happening? All I'm seeing is black. And all I'm hearing from my guides is ask her to spell her name again. And I was like, you're joking. They're like, no, ask her to spell her name again. I was like, she's not spelling her name wrong. Who does that? So I said to her, I'm sorry, this is going to sound a little bonkers, but can you confirm that this is your name? And she looked and she goes, oh my God, there's a typo. And I was like, oh my gosh, that's insane. That the only time I couldn't open the records is because the name was wrong and the guides were telling me that I needed to have faith. So it was all of these little tiny moments in the beginning stages of me doing this that gave me the confidence and understanding of what it is that I'm doing and how important it is. And yeah, that I actually do have this gift.
You most certainly have this gift. So thank God you discovered it, because how many people you will have helped in the time that you've been doing this.
I hope so.
And how fortunate that you decided to move to Paris when you did.
Oh, yeah. That was very fortunate, actually.
Unlocked your gift.
Yeah. And I think that it was the place that it needed to happen, because I knew I wanted to leave Chicago for quite some time. It was necessary. And I feel like the energy just supported me in that here.
We should mention that this podcast is coming to you from Annette's fabulous Paris apartment, and that we're very lucky to be able to meet up and do these recordings in.
Yeah.
So it's very much Paris that's brought us together, actually.
Indeed.
One of these beautiful synchronicities in life. The reason we did actually first meet was because I did reach out to you because I had a podcast idea in mind, completely unrelated to anything that we're doing. But I had heard of you in the Paris spiritual circles, and I had just reached out to kind of have a chat about your experiences of being a podcast creator. And little did I know that a year and a half later, you and I would be creating our own podcast.
Exactly.
I wonder, did you have an inkling, being a psychic medium and all?
They don't tell me everything about my life. Otherwise, why would I live it, if I knew everything already? So they have a tendency to keep things under wraps. So we met at this fabulous cafe. We sat down and we talked, and we've basically just been friends ever since.
And we talk about spirituality nonstop anyway, because we're both completely, fascinated by the subject matter, and it permeates our lives on a daily basis. But certainly the fact that you do this for a living provides a lot of very interesting conversation topics. And bit by bit, it took on the form of a podcast. All right. So on that note, if people want to be a part of the podcast or want to session with you, how can they do that, Annette?
If you would like to be a part of the podcast, if you would like to record a session with me, all you need to do is go to the website and book a session, either a 90-minute or 2-hour session. It doesn't matter, either one. And there is a box that you check upon checkout that says that, yes, you would like to be considered for the podcast, or no, you will not. And the reason why we say considered is because not all sessions are resonant or relevant to a wider audience. So we may or may not use the session, but if you are interested, you can go to my website, book a session there, click the yes box if you're interested, and you might be featured on one of the episodes.
Absolutely. And until then, don't hesitate to get in touch with us. We'd love to hear your comments, your feedback, your reflections, anything that you'd like to share with us. You can do so where, Annette?
You can reach us by going to my website at infinitesoulLove.com. There's a contact us page. You can fill out whatever you want to fill out on the contact page, ask us questions, give us feedback, whatever you want. Also, we would love your participation by rating the podcast. It really does help. Rate the podcast, follow it on Spotify, iTunes, wherever you're listening to podcasts.
It's also available on YouTube.
It is also available on YouTube at Infinite Soul Love 1111. And you can also follow me at that same handle on Instagram and Facebook and TikTok.
Perfect.
Is that it?
I think so.
I think that's all the ways in which people can get a hold of us. Thanks so much, Julia.
Thank you so much, Annette. I cannot wait to see how this journey of this podcast unfolds.
I know, it's super exciting, and I can't wait to continue this journey with you. Make sure you tune in next week for the very first episode of the Akashic Recordings.